There is a pain that teaches more than pleasure ever could. If you've been controlled, manipulated, or made to question your worth, you're not broken, you're being forged. This isn't just a motivational speech. It's a blueprint. And by the end, you'll understand why that pain wasn't punishment. It was preparation. There is a moment in every person's life when comfort ends and discomfort begins, and it is precisely in that transition where true growth is ignited. Pain, though unwanted, is the most powerful catalyst for personal transformation because it tears away illusion and forces you to confront the reality you've long avoided. Consider the individual who finds themselves entangled in a relationship where they constantly feel unseen, unheard, and unappreciated, yet they stay, rationalizing the neglect in the name of love, loyalty, or hope for change. Day after day, their self-worth erodes, not all at once, but in tiny, imperceptible fragments, until one day the pain becomes louder than the excuses. That moment, the moment they look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person staring back, is the awakening. The discomfort that once felt unbearable now becomes the signal to rise. This is not just emotional suffering. This is life's hand pulling you by the collar, saying, "You were not meant to live this way." Pain shatters the illusion of security. It exposes the habits, the people, and the environments that have kept you small. It reveals the truth. That growth will never occur in the comfort of denial. Just as a seed must break open to sprout, you too must be cracked wide open by pressure before your real power emerges. The pain you resist is the teacher you need, and when you no longer flee from it, but face it, examine it, and absorb its lessons, you begin to unlock a mental clarity and strength that no book, mentor, or philosophy alone could ever instill. Pain pushes you out of complacency, and in doing so, it awakens the sleeping giant of potential within. Think of the woman who spent years living under the shadow of a partner who belittled her, controlled her choices, and made her question her own intuition. She may have tolerated it because she believed she was being strong or loyal. But the day she decided to walk away, not because she stopped loving, but because she finally started loving herself more, that was the day she began to reclaim her life. That decision didn't arise from joy. It rose from suffering. Her pain became the birthplace of her personal revolution. Narcissists, for all their outward bravado and inward emptiness, serve a peculiar role in the journey of the driven individual. They do not enter your life to lead you, though they may claim to. They do not possess the power to define you, though they will try to. What they truly offer is a mirror one that reflects the unresolved fragments within your own mind, often disguised as affection, admiration, or authority. A narcissist cannot create insecurity within you. They can only exploit the insecurity that already exists. Their manipulation is not built from their strength, but from your blind spots, your hunger for validation, your unhealed wounds, your silence in the face of disrespect. They do not hypnotize you with charm alone. It is your hope, your fantasy, your yearning to be seen or chosen that makes their illusion so magnetic. And so their presence becomes diagnostic. They are the alarm clock for the soul. Consider the story of a young man, ambitious, intelligent, full of vision, but burdened with a quiet, deep need for approval he never fully recognized. He meets someone who seems to see his potential, who speaks to him in grand terms, who flatters him, encourages him, and draws close with magnetic intensity. For a while, he feels elevated, as if he's finally found someone who sees him as exceptional. But slowly, that admiration curdles. The compliments become criticisms. The support becomes control. He is questioned, doubted, manipulated not overtly, but subtly through twisted logic and shifting expectations. Still, he stays. Why? Because the very voice that undermines him echoes the one he grew up with, the voice that said, "You must prove yourself to earn love." The narcissist unknowingly is reflecting his deepest internal belief that he is not enough as he is. As the relationship continues, he becomes reactive, defensive, drained, and yet every insult feels familiar, every manipulation oddly personal. It is not the narcissist's behavior alone that holds him, it is the unfinished business within himself that binds him to it. Until one day he realizes he is not fighting the narcissist, he is fighting the version of himself that accepted this dynamic as normal. The narcissist, in this sense, is not a master dictating his fate. but a mirror exposing the thoughts and beliefs he must confront and correct. Through that realization, he begins to step back not just from the person, but from the false self that sought validation in another's domination. What he once interpreted as love, he now sees as leverage. What he once mistook for strength, he now recognizes as manipulation. And as he rewrites the story of his own worth, the narcissist's power begins to dissolve. Not because the narcissist changed, but because he changed what he allowed to reflect back at him. Emotions, when left undisciplined, are like wild horses. They respond to every noise, every shadow, every sudden movement, and in doing so, they lead the rider into chaos. But when emotions are trained and governed by thought, they become not a weakness, but a weapon, an internal engine of power that cannot be derailed by the unpredictable actions of others. Emotional control is not about suppression, it is about strategic direction. It is the ability to observe your own internal responses without being enslaved by them. It is understanding that while you cannot always dictate what happens to you, you can always determine the meaning you assign to it and, more importantly, how you respond to it. The man or woman who allows their emotional state to be dictated by others becomes a puppet whose strings are pulled by the external world. But the one who controls their reactions commands their own fate. Imagine a woman in a relationship with someone who constantly provokes her not with outright cruelty, but with subtle jabs, backhanded compliments, dismissive tones, and carefully timed silence. At first, she reacts as anyone would, defending herself, raising her voice, demanding clarity, chasing understanding. But every time she does, she feels weaker, more entangled, more exhausted. What she doesn't yet see is that the provocations are not accidental, they are tools. The more she reacts, the more power she gives away. And the more power she gives away, the more the other person controls the emotional climate of the relationship. It becomes a cycle. The narcissist triggers, she responds, and then the narcissist reframes the narrative to paint her as unstable, over-emotional, or difficult. The trap isn't just in the words exchanged, it's in the emotional baiting that keeps her mentally off balance. But one day she chooses a new approach. She begins to respond instead of react. Instead of shouting back, she listens quietly. Instead of defending every accusation, she pauses and allows silence to do the talking. Instead of begging for understanding, she turns inward and asks herself what part of her still feels the need to explain her worth to someone who refuses to see it. Her stillness becomes unsettling. Her calm becomes threatening, not because she intends harm, but because she has reclaimed the reins of her own emotional life. The person who once thrived on triggering her begins to lose grip. Their tactics no longer produce the same drama, the same justification for control, and she realizes something powerful. The moment she stopped being emotionally predictable, she became mentally untouchable. She didn't need to win the argument. She needed to win her own self-mastery. Emotional control gave her that not by changing the other person, but by changing her own state of mind. And with that shift, she moves from a reactive existence to a conscious, intentional life where her thoughts govern her emotions and her vision governs her thoughts. No man rises above the level of the company he keeps. The road to success, whether in wealth, character, peace of mind, or purpose, is not only paved by effort and discipline, it is shaped, sharpened, or shattered by those who walk it beside you. Every person you allow into your life carries with them an energy, a set of values, a mental atmosphere, and whether you recognize it or not, you absorb their influence. This influence either lifts you or limits you. It is not always the loud critic or the obvious saboteur who derails your progress. It is often the passive doubter, the subtle pessimist, the one who calls your ambition unrealistic or labels your drive as too much. These individuals don't always argue with your dreams. Sometimes they just sigh or roll their eyes or stay quiet when you need encouragement the most. Their impact is not in direct opposition, but in gradual erosion. Like water dripping on stone, their presence slowly shapes your thinking, not through force, but through proximity. Picture a man with a fire in his belly, full of ideas and a clear vision for the life he wants to build. He begins to speak boldly of his plans, shares his vision with old friends, family, perhaps a romantic partner. At first, there's politeness, a few smiles, but no real support. Soon come the comments, small, seemingly harmless remarks like, "Don't get your hopes up," or "That's not how the real world works," or "You've changed." He doesn't notice the weight at first, but gradually he starts delaying his plans, second-guessing his instincts, lowering his goals to make others more comfortable. He calls it being practical, but deep down he knows he's conforming to the emotional ceiling of the people around him. His environment hasn't inspired expansion, it has rewarded his hesitation. Not because those around him were evil or jealous, but because they were complacent, and complacency is contagious. Then one day he meets someone different. Perhaps it's a mentor, a colleague, or even just a voice through a book or a video, someone who doesn't just tolerate ambition, but speaks it fluently. Someone who doesn't ask, "Are you sure you can do that?" but says, "What's your next move?" The contrast is immediate. One conversation with the right person breathes more life into his vision than a year spent justifying it to the wrong ones. He begins to see how much energy he has spent trying to be understood instead of trying to grow. And as this new influence takes root, he starts making quiet but radical changes, limiting conversations that drain him, distancing from relationships that confuse stagnation with loyalty, and surrounding himself with minds that stretch his thinking instead of shrinking it. He doesn't announce his choices because success does not require a press release, it requires discipline. He simply starts aligning himself with people who reflect where he is going, not where he's been. His success doesn't arrive overnight, but his momentum shifts. Ideas flow more freely. His confidence rebuilds. His time becomes more focused. And all of this begins not with a change in talent or resources, but a change in who has access to his mind. There is a truth so vital, so foundational to success in any area of life, that when ignored, it becomes the very reason dreams are delayed, relationships become prisons, and potential rots in silence. That truth is this: your self-worth is not negotiable. It is not a topic open for discussion, debate, or discount, yet too often people behave as if it were a bargaining chip to be handed over for love, approval, or belonging. From an early age, many are conditioned to believe that their value is dependent on performance, perfection, or people-pleasing. They come to associate their worth with how well they meet others' expectations, how useful they are, how agreeable they remain, how little space they occupy, and so they shrink themselves, dull their brilliance, suppress their opinions, and endure mistreatment, all in the name of staying accepted, staying chosen, staying wanted. But what they don't realize is that every time they say yes to what insults their soul, they silently say no to their own dignity. Picture a young woman in a relationship where love is measured out in rations, not abundance. She gives freely her time, her energy, her compassion, but in return receives only emotional crumbs. Her partner belittles her dreams, downplays her accomplishments, and makes her feel as though she's lucky just to be tolerated. At first, she rationalizes the behavior. She tells herself that he's just under pressure or not good with emotions. But over time, a subtle erosion begins. She starts questioning her instincts, over apologizing, walking on eggshells. She stops speaking up when something bothers her. She begins to accept the unacceptable, not because she believes it is right, but because somewhere deep down she has tied her self-worth to his approval. She begins to believe that if she could just be more patient, more understanding, less demanding, then maybe she would finally be enough. But this is the illusion, the lie that says your worth is something to be earned rather than something to be known. One day, something shifts. Maybe it's a small moment, a forgotten birthday, a public humiliation, or a passing comment that cuts too deep. But instead of reacting, she pauses. She hears a different voice rise up, one that's been silent for too long. It whispers, "This isn't love, it's negotiation, and your value is not a contract that needs signatures." For the first time, she doesn't look at him for an answer. She looks inward. She begins to remember who she was before she made herself small to fit into someone else's version of what she should be. She begins to see that the love she has been chasing from others is the very love she has withheld from herself. And as this realization strengthens, her standards rise, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't demand change. She simply starts walking in the direction of self-respect. Her tone changes, her energy shifts, her boundaries harden not as walls, but as gates to guard her internal worth from being negotiated again. There comes a time in every person's life when they must look back not with regret, but with reason. Life does not unfold without wounds. Some are visible, many are not. But a wound once healed leaves behind a scar, and that scar, if examined with wisdom rather than shame, becomes more than a reminder of pain. It becomes a symbol of survival, a source of instruction, and ultimately a strategy. Pain without reflection is just suffering, but pain that is studied, understood, and transformed becomes a personal blueprint for progress. The very experience that once broke you can become the tool that builds you. For many, the instinct is to hide the scar, to forget the past, to bury the embarrassment of being misled, mistreated, or manipulated. But the power does not lie in forgetting, it lies in extracting the lesson and putting it to use. A scar is not a weakness. It is proof that you endured something that tried to take you down and didn't. And once you stop seeing it as a mark of shame and begin seeing it as a map, it shows you exactly where you were wounded, how you recovered, and what to avoid in the future. Think of a man who once poured his entire self into a relationship that seemed promising on the surface, but was in truth a slow erosion of his identity. He gave, supported, adjusted, explained until there was almost nothing left of his original self. His confidence was slowly dismantled through emotional manipulation disguised as love. He emerged from that relationship not just heartbroken, but mentally fragmented, questioning his judgment, doubting his worth. For a time, he kept the experience to himself, hoping that silence would speed the healing. But it didn't. What finally moved the needle wasn't time, it was perspective. He began to study what happened, not from a place of blame, but from a place of curiosity. What patterns did he ignore? What early signs did he excuse? What part of him was so eager to be accepted that he tolerated disrespect disguised as affection? He started writing about it, not publicly at first, just for himself. He mapped out the psychological traps, the behavioral red flags, the subtle shifts that turned him into a version of himself he no longer recognized. And in doing so, something clicked. He realized he wasn't the only one. His scar was not unique, but his insight into it could be. He began sharing it with others, offering perspective, warning signs, and strategies not from theory, but from lived experience. What once brought him to his knees became the very foundation of his strength, his clarity, and even his purpose. He no longer looked at the relationship as a failure. He looked at it as training, not because the pain was deserved, but because it became useful. His greatest emotional injury evolved into his most effective inner intelligence. What he once tried to forget, he now used as a compass, turning that scar into a strategy that shaped his choices, sharpened his instincts, and solidified his standards. Remember this: life does not reward the one who hides their pain, it rewards the one who transforms it. The scar is not the end of your story, it is the place where a new chapter begins, written not in fear, but in clarity. What once broke you is now your blueprint. What once silenced you is now your strategy. The most powerful people you will ever meet are not the ones who avoided suffering, but the ones who refused to let it define them. So look at your scars not as evidence of weakness, but as the signature of survival. They are the receipts of lessons paid in full. And now, with eyes wide open and wisdom in hand, you are no longer the wounded, you are the strategist.